Welcome to podcast episode number 1 here at Mavericracy. My name is Adrian Avil, and I will be talking about the alleged Gaza Genocide, one of the top topics that are being covered worldwide in the media, as well by governments. One of the biggest lies of the century, if not the biggest lie of the century. Before we are going to debunk the Gaza genocide, we first have to understand what a genocide is. Okay, we have to create a basis of understanding, because words are meaningless if there's no definition attached to it. So, what is a genocide? We can look at the UN Genocide Convention here in Article 2, and its subparagraphs. It is defined as a committed act, intent to destroy, either partially or in whole, a national, racial, ethnic, or religious group. Okay, intent is the key word here. So it's not about the number of deaths. So if you reach a certain number of people, then if you kill a certain number of people, then it is genocide. No, the intent behind it matters. So it doesn't matter if it's 500 or 500 million, okay? To exaggerate here. Let's take some examples to better display genocides, because we unfortunately have a lot of these in history. For example, the Armenian genocide, which took place roughly between 1915 to 1923, if my memory serves me well here. Around 1.5 million Armenians were killed by the Ottomans. 1941 to 1945, the Holocaust took place, where 6 million Jews were killed by Nazi Germany in the first industrialized mass murder in history. Intent can be clearly seen here, like clearer than it's one of the best examples, unfortunately, but one of the best examples that can be used here. The Nazis employed tens of thousands of people in the SS and also the German army, the Wehrmacht, as well as their collaborators across Europe, to manage the over 1,000 camps they established across Europe. They used what would be millions, hundreds of millions maybe. I'm not entirely sure about the conversion rate between German Reichsmark and US dollars. Also not easy to make the calculation. Now, how much that would be in modern terms if we take inflation and currency conversion into account, but nonetheless, a large amount of financial means that went into this effort. And it went even so far that the Nazis diverted financial resources away from their war effort in order to kill Jews, due to their fanaticism and their hatred. So, and then, the gas chambers, the crematoria, like this entire infrastructure, the entire German railway system. Okay. Auschwitz alone had 1 million Jews that were murdered there, that were all transported through the German railway system. So intent is very crystal clear here in the definition, right? Moving forward, we have more Bosnian genocide, the Srebrenica massacre, if I mispronounce it. Excuse me for that. Around 8,000 Bosnians were killed by Serbs. Here we can see the number itself is much lower, 8,000, compared to the 6 million Jews or the 1.5 million Armenians. But nonetheless, it was a genocide, because the Bosnian Serbs tried to ethnically cleanse the Bosnian Muslim population during the Bosnian War. In Rwanda, in 1994, were around 800,000 Tutsis and also moderate Hutus that were killed in roughly 100 days. Okay, that's around 8,000 deaths per day. And we have various other genocides that took place. The Herero and Namaka genocide, for example, also in the early 20th century, where you had around 80,000 Herero and Nama people killed by the German Empire in Namibia. So yeah, we can see that numbers do not define genocide, but intent does. So now let's jump into the situation in Gaza. First of all, how did the Gaza war start? Everybody talks about Gaza, the destruction of Gaza, the alleged genocide taking place, this lie that is being pushed, right? But how did it start? Well, October 7. Okay, October 7, 2023, when Hamas terrorists invaded Israel by land, sea, and air, and indiscriminately killed everybody they came across. Around 1,200 Israelis were murdered, and 251 hostages taken into Gaza, abducted into Gaza. Hamas didn't even make a difference between Jewish Israelis or Arab Israelis. They didn't care. Everybody they came across in Israel was a target for them. Everybody is seen as someone who works or cooperates with the state of Israel, is seen as someone who deserves to die. Okay, intent is very clear here. They didn't specifically target military targets. They purposefully aimed at Israeli civilians. And if the IDF would not have put a stop to this and pushed the invaders back across Gaza, this number would have been much, much higher as well. But again, the number itself is irrelevant. Okay, the intent is relevant. So actually, the October 7 massacres fulfill the definition of a genocide. Nobody talks about that. Nobody says the October 7 genocide, the genocide against Jews, right? Besides the fact that it was the largest amount of Jews also killed since the Holocaust as well. Besides the fact that Hamas clearly stated they would do it again and again and again, and clearly even has it in a charter that their goal is the complete annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of all Jews. They didn't lie. They spoke the truth. They made their intentions very clear on October 7. I mean, technically speaking, their intentions should have been known by everybody across the world beforehand, because it was not the first round between Israel and Hamas, not the first war. But for everybody who was still not clear about the motivation of Hamas, even though it boggles my mind how that could be possible, but nonetheless, we know that a lot of people don't understand the conflict very well. Just something the pro-Palestinian side always uses for their own advantage. Nonetheless, in response to the massacres, once the invaders were pushed back into Gaza, the IDF started the airstrikes, but already initiated various methods to reduce dead enemy civilians. Knock-knock bombs, leaflets, SMS, the usual strategies the IDF employs to minimize civilian death. And then, of course, the ground invasion happened. And yes, in this war, Israel was much firmer than in previous wars, which by itself should be very logical if you think about it, considering the atrocities that happened on October 7. Let's analyze the civilian death rate in Gaza, or the death rate in Gaza in general. Here is where the lie comes in that Israel is right now operating in Gaza, committing a genocide against the Palestinian people, right? So let's start off with the official Hamas numbers. Hamas claims that after a year of fighting, this episode has been recorded on October 25, 2024. So roughly a year after the October 7 counter invasion of Israel into Gaza. So roughly after 1 year of fighting, around 40,000 Palestinians have died, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. It's very important to mention it's Hamas-run, but nonetheless, let's take their numbers. Let's grant them the 40,000. Israel believes the numbers are lower. Also, Israel states that the ratio of dead civilians versus dead combatants is different to what Hamas states. Hamas doesn't make a difference between civilians and terrorists. They just say 40,000 Palestinians and that's it, which is a war crime by itself, considering that combatants should be differentiated compared to civilians. But Hamas also, the way they fight, they do not wear uniforms. They wear jeans, t-shirts, regular clothing, which makes it absolutely impossible for a soldier to know, is this a soldier right now, or a terrorist, or is this a civilian, combatant or civilian, right? Hamas does this on purpose, and obviously, besides the fact of trying to confuse IDF soldiers in their operational capabilities, they also do it for the cameras. So if Israel kills a squad of terrorists who all wear jeans, Hamas can go with their sponsored Al Jazeera and other media outlets, film the dead bodies, and then show to the world, look, this is what Israel did. Look at the dead civilians here. And again, it's a war crime in itself, not to clearly label combatants in comparison to civilians, okay? So, again, the numbers vary here. Israel says 70% of everybody killed was a combatant. But even if we take the Hamas numbers of 40,000 and then we extrapolate how many of those were Hamas terrorists, also according to Hamas's own admission, they say they lost 12,000 and 16,000. They do change the numbers, but they do admit that they lost a certain amount of soldiers, or terrorists rather, combatants, whereas the actual number would be at least 20,000, if not more. But, you know, in the end, 16,000, 20,000, it doesn't make too much of a difference to make a point. So let's just go with, let's take the Hamas numbers just for making a very clear point here that this is not a genocide that is happening. Let's take their numbers. Let's take the numbers they're using themselves. If we have 20,000 Hamas combatants who died and 20,000 civilians, which makes it a ratio of 1-to-1. Keep this in mind, okay? In urban warfare is the most difficult type of warfare you can imagine, because it's densely populated. There are lots of civilians there, lots of places to hide for combatants, terrorists, soldiers, whoever is fighting in these settings. Having a 1-to-1 or almost 1-to-1 a combatant to civilian ratio is, in military terms speaking, almost a wonder. Okay, yes, we can say that no dead civilian is a good thing. But then again, let's be realistic here and wake up, okay? A war is war. War is never clean. It's the nature of war since the dawn of mankind, okay? So it is very important that we understand the actual reality on the ground here. Now, let's compare this with other wars, okay? To get kind of an idea of where the Gaza war fits in. So if we take a look at Syria, especially Aleppo, Raqqa, we have approximately a ratio of 1 to 5 combatants to civilian death. Okay, around 400,000 civilians, if not more, it's already might be 500, 600,000 have been killed in the Syrian civil war, but the ratio is roughly 1 to 5. Okay, compare this with the 1 to 1 in Gaza, 1 to 5 in Syria. Then let's take a look at Iraq. At Mosul, everybody remembers the stronghold ISIS had in Mosul after the international coalition finally pushed back against the jihadi oppression that took place across Syria, Iraq some years ago. In Mosul, when the city was captured, we had a ratio of around 1 to 4. Okay, so for every dead terrorist, for every dead combatant, we had 4 dead civilians. Okay, I have not seen anybody complain against the Kurdish forces, the United States, or any other coalition partner for liberating the city from ISIS oppression. Okay, it's very important to remember. And then let's look at some other numbers. So in Nazi Germany, we had approximately 500 to 600,000 German civilians who died due to Allied bombing campaigns. Also starvation and other war-related reasons, okay? But more than 500,000. Here, we have to keep in mind that Dresden, a German city, 25,000 civilians died within 2 days after Allied bombardments. I don't see anybody complain about the dead German civilians in Dresden, the 25,000 that were killed in 2 days. The only ones who mourn these dead civilians, German civilians, are actually neo-Nazis, okay, in the US, in Germany, who called it a Holocaust, who called it a genocide. Here we can see it's this same type of language neo-Nazis are using to accuse the allies of being evil, being the perpetrator of evil, and therefore covering their own evil. So basically confusing action and consequence. This is exactly the same the pro-Palestinians are doing here, which we are going to see further down the line here as well. So if we conclude the talking about the civilian to combatant death rate, 1-to-1 ratio that we have in Gaza right now is probably the lowest, or one of the lowest, or at least the lower spectrum that we have in urban warfare. Okay, and it shows that civilians are not being targeted. So, a lot of times Palestinians or pro-Palestinians will say, "Oh well, the genocide didn't start on October 7. The Israelis started the genocide already way before that." Well, okay, let's take a look at that. No problem. In 1948, when the modern state of Israel was founded, there were around roughly 250,000 people living in Gaza. Okay. Now in 2024, we have around 2.3 million. In the West Bank, so-called West Bank, the indigenous term is Judea and Samaria. In 1948 as well, there were around 350,000 people. Now there are 3.2 million. So that equals percentage growth of around 820% for Gaza and 814% for the West Bank. Let that sink in, okay? Genocides decrease population numbers. No matter how small or big, but they decrease them. They don't increase them. And they don't increase them almost 1,000%, okay? There are statistics where you can take a look at population growth. If there's a genocide, you would see a downward spike. You would see a decrease for a while, and then you would afterwards you would notice a recovery. With the Palestinians, there's exponential growth, unstopped. There's not a single downward spike. There's not anything at any time period. It is just going up, 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 up. So yeah, this is a very important factor here. So suddenly this whole accusation makes no more sense. We don't have intent. Okay, the IDF is using a lot of means to warn the enemy population. There are evacuation zones inside Gaza where the IDF tells Gazan civilians to go to, so that it can operate freely against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other militant groups. I'm not sure that other countries would go to such length to protect the enemy civilian population after what happened on October 7, especially considering the fact that the Palestinian civilians are actually still in support of the October 7 massacres. I might cover this, or not might, I will cover this in another episode more, to look at Palestinian hatred and the numbers there. But the Palestinian civilians, for a large part, are not innocent. They participated in the October 7 massacres, they cheered for them. Around 70% of them. There's a massive support base for either Hamas or other militant groups. And there's almost 0%, maybe 0.4% of support for peace with Israel. So, and Israel is still going the long mile, is walking the way to try and protect the civilian population in Gaza. Israel is also providing the civilians in Gaza with aid, so food, water, etc. This is surreal. Okay, no time in history did one side supply his enemy with food, water, and supplies in general, medicine. Imagine the world telling Winston Churchill in World War II to please go for a ceasefire so that Britain can send supplies to Nazi Germany for the poor German civilian population, right? It is not something that would make any sense, and it almost sounds like dark comedy. Unfortunately, this is the reality Israel is faced with. Israel's pressure to supply the Gazans with goods. An argument that pro-Palestinians often use is, yeah, but well, they don't have any other means to get anything. Well, first of all, not true. They have a border with Egypt. Okay, everybody thinks that Israel has a siege on Gaza, which is absolutely not true. Gaza has 2 land borders with Egypt and with Israel. The Egyptians have completely locked it down. Yes, they let in shipments, far too few, considering that those are supposed to be their Arab brothers. And they have a massive fence and border protection system in place. And basically any Gazan who would even try to reach into Egypt would be shot dead immediately. Nobody talks about Egypt here. So the entire responsibility is somehow shifted over to Israel. And again, there were accusations in the beginning that Israel stopped supplying Gaza with water. First of all, imagine your country just suffered a massive attack. Would you be willing to supply your enemy with anything in the aftermath? Imagine the United States after 9/11 being forced or being asked to supply any kind of goods to the Taliban. I don't think the Americans after 9/11 were very keen of helping the Taliban. They were more keen of exacting justice and bringing those to justice that orchestrated the horrendous attacks of 9/11. So yeah, it is a very surreal situation Israel is facing. We also need to consider another element here. A lot of the supplies that are going into Gaza are being stolen by Hamas. So Hamas is hijacking those trucks and taking those supplies. There's a lot of evidence in the tunnels that Israel cleared already, where you have a lot of UN and other food supplies being hoarded, whereas the Gazan population doesn't have access to them. Hamas, it should be more than evident that Hamas is using the Palestinians, the Palestinian population as human, not only human shields, but also exploiting their lives. Lives are very cheap in jihadi philosophy. They don't have any value. That is something very important for Westerners to understand. The Judeo-Christian world, there's human dignity in every life has a value. This is not how jihadists think, quite the opposite. If someone dies, he died for a cause. It's very collectivist thinking, where the death can be employed for something, for a propaganda win, basically. Showing dead Palestinians is a good media front for them. This is a very important aspect to understand here. If we talk about the infrastructure in Gaza, which is another argument being used by pro-Palestinians who claim that the white destruction in Gaza is somehow an example for genocide. No, it's called urban warfare. This is what happens in urban warfare after a year. It's the way of how wars work. Look at Mosul. Look at any setting in the world. Either nowadays we have Russia, Ukraine. There's a lot of things to look at there, in places that the Russians and Ukrainians fighting for a prolonged time, even if it wasn't shelled that much beforehand. Trust me, after some time, there will be just rubble left. This is the way of how wars work, if it hasn't been shelled beforehand already, that is. Around 80% of the Gazan infrastructure, or Gaza, has been destroyed. This is the argument they're using by saying, oh, look, 80% has been destroyed. That shows clearly that there's a genocide happening. Buildings, let me put it like this, like for dummies, okay? Buildings do not fall under the definition of genocide, okay? That's not how it works. Intent of killing a group of people based on their characteristics, racial, national, religious, etc. This is what is part of genocide, as we covered in the very beginning. Israel doesn't just target the houses for fun. Okay, we have to understand that that Gaza isn't Mosul or any other urban setting. In one important aspect, the entire Gaza Strip has been turned into a terror enclave, a terror base. Schools, hospitals, mosques, residential areas, kindergartens have all been turned into terror bases, from where missiles are being fired at Israeli civilians, where they are stashing their weapons, their ammunition, etc. And then, of course, you have the thousands of miles of tunnels underneath the Gaza as well, paid by your taxpayer funds. I'm not sure how you feel about this. I think everybody should feel outraged that the money given to Gaza with the intent to help the Palestinian population and the civilian population there has been redirected into building very sophisticated terror networks underground. So this speaks in its own episode about the corruption of the United Nations and the complacency of the world. On one hand, complacency and ignorance. On the other hand, the intent of Hamas and their international allies to funnel money into terrorist infrastructure. So Israel has no other choice but to bomb a school if there are weapons hiding there. Okay, there's only so much Israel can do. Warning the civilians to evacuate, which they often do. This is why the civilian death ratio is so low. And then Israel can go ahead and remove the now legitimate military target. Israel has to remove also the tunnels, which are part of this military infrastructure. And this is something you don't have in other urban settings. You didn't have this in Germany, Nazi Germany. You didn't have that in Iraq, in Mosul. It is something that Hamas and also Hezbollah are using. So it makes it even more difficult for Israel to combat and dismantle the terrorist infrastructure that they have built there. So now you could have still people say, yeah, but well, you look what Israel, maybe they just need to take more time for the genocide. Maybe because they are still in the process of it, the genocide is not finished. Okay, so can't say there is no genocide because of the continuation of the current war where they are doing it. This is a very, very stupid argument. It's not even an argument. It's a very, I don't even have words for it. It's not just naive or ignorant. Stupid. It's plainly manipulative and dumb. Let's just call it what it is. But sure, let's play with this. Let's make a little simulation here and look at the capabilities of the state of Israel and the Israel Defense Forces, the military strength, and what Israel could do if it actually wanted to target enemy civilians, okay? So Israel has roughly 600 fighter jets, F-35s, F-16s, F-15s, very modern fighter jets, which are all capable of carrying a wider range of weapons, often JDAMs, which are GPS-guided bombs, which are extremely accurate, by the way, but they're capable of destroying entire blocks and buildings. But in reality are being used to minimize collateral damage because of the accuracy. But yeah, now we're assuming that Israel in this simulation would want to kill as many civilians as possible. Okay, let's take it and see what could happen. But first, let's explain the military strength Israel possesses. Okay, so we have hundreds of fighter jets. We have like roughly 500-ish, a bit more, I think, artillery weapons, howitzers, mobile mortars, etc. We have also Tomahawk missiles on Israeli naval and vessels, like mostly submarines and corvettes, I think. So Israel could encircle Gaza more or less, and from the sea as well, and then bombard it from all sides, air, sea, and land, if it wanted to do so. So let's say Israel is using the entire Air Force, so all roughly 600 jets, or I'm not entirely sure it's 600, maybe it's 550, maybe it's 650, it's around 600 that Israel has. So if Israel each carries around 6 bombs, okay, and Israel's doing 2 sorties per day, it would be like around 7,200 bombs per day. And again, now Israel is purposely targeting civilians in this simulation, okay? Considering that one JDAM bomb that I mentioned earlier, if dropped specifically on civilians, a single JDAM could kill easily between 50 to 100 civilians in a densely populated area, okay? So if we have 7,200 bombs, and if each bomb can kill 50 to 100 civilians, that would be like 360,000 to 720,000 civilian deaths. Okay, it's obviously exaggerated because it assumes that every single bomb finds its target, every single bomb drops exactly on civilians. But yeah, this is if we maximize if you maximize the potential here, okay, the artillery units, you can fire like 15,000 shells per day. If each shell kills like 10 to 50 civilians, that would also be 150 to 750,000 civilian deaths per day. And then, of course, we have Tomahawk missiles. I'm not sure how many Tomahawk missiles Israel has in its arsenal, but you could also kill up to 10,000 people per day if you launched 100 of them or so. So yeah, that assumes indiscriminate targeting of civilians, and of course, we are assuming that every single bomb is able to find a that civilian. But to make it more realistic, and for the course of a year, we should say that if Israel was looking for civilians to bomb and to shoot unrestricted firepower, just short of nuclear weapons, right? We would definitely have, and that is a realistic setting, if Israel aimed purposefully on civilians, hundreds of thousands of civilians that we will be dead within a few weeks or month. Okay, so the war has been going on for over a year. By then, Israel could have pretty much killed 80 to 90% of the civilian population. And I'm saying 80 to 90% because, of course, if you kill almost 2 million people, the remaining 300,000 will hide better. So it would be harder to find them. So the amount of enemy civilians that you are able to massacre would be much less, obviously, because they're not as densely populated anymore. But nonetheless, the reality clearly shows that with all the firepower Israel has, and with this little simulation I played, if Israel was really doing a genocide, why do we have only 40,000 deaths, which more than half actually, but never mind if we take the Hamas numbers or not, but of which more than half of those 40,000 were actually enemy combatants, not civilians. So we have approximately maximum 20,000 civilians that died over the course of a year. This is crazy. And not crazy in the way of, oh my God, Israel has committed a genocide. It's crazy how Israel is able in this densely populated Gaza Strip to avoid enemy civilian casualties. This is something that never occurred in human history to this level and degree before, considering the circumstances Israel has to deal with. So yeah, every time you hear anything about the so-called genocide in Gaza, now you know that there's a complete lie happening here, aimed at legitimizing Israel in front of the world, and also it's a form of the modern blood libel, portraying the only Jewish state as a monstrous entity which has nothing better to do than killing Palestinians. Again, if Israel wanted to commit a genocide against Gaza, it not only would it have the firepower to actually do so, but it would have done so a very long time ago. The fact that the Palestinian population growth is massive shows the absolute opposite. The fact that tens of thousands of Gazans got work permits in Israel before October 7th and worked in Israel, which was the Israeli attempt trying to approach the Palestinians in Gaza to try to find peace by offering them better economic incentives. By the way, Egypt has done nothing to help the Gazans at all. No job opportunities, no nothing. Weird, right? But this should be analyzed in another episode. So yeah, in conclusion, Israel's war of self-defense does not fit by any stretch of the imagination, morally or legally, the definition of genocide. The death toll is way too low to identify any sort of intent of a genocide that Israel still would want to do. Makes absolutely no sense. The data disproves this. And again, intent is the key here. Hamas purposefully targeted Israeli civilians on October 7, and this fulfills the definition of genocide. So this is why it's always important to critically examine everything that's presented to you, look at the facts, because there's a lot of misinformation happening, and then engage in empirical, data-driven, and evidence-based discourse on the conflict. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.